Today we're going to start the second section of Chapter 21, Incoming Substances. We're going to talk about the digestive system. The digestive system is responsible for obtaining the energy sources and the other substances that your body cells are going to need. And this process of obtaining the energy, the organs of the digestive system provide a means of ingestion, and that means the way we take in food. And then it also provides structures and enzymes for digesting the food, for breaking the food down into a soluble substance that your body can absorb into the bloodstream. So this allows the molecules from the food that's been broken down into a soluble form to be absorbed into the bloodstream to be taken to the body cells. Now, once the food is utilized, we've taken out all the soluble parts and it's utilized for growth and repair. It's removed through a process called egestion. Egestion is just the elimination of undigested, unabsorbed materials. Muscles, tissue in the walls of the digestive system just move the food along while these functions are being performed. So it just has a steady process as it moves through your body. These are the structures that you will find that make up your digestive system. Some of these structures that you have studied before already, like words like epiglottis, esophagus, we had trachea, are the ones that were up there in the mouth. And then you have the tube that will carry the food all the way through your digestive system. You have the esophagus that leads to the stomach, which leads to the small intestine, which eventually empties into the large intestine. And along the way we have lots of other little structures that will be part of the digestive system, each playing its important role. The digestion organs, or the organs that make up the digestive system, can be just divided kind of into two groups. We have what's called the alimentary canal, and that is made up of the mouth and the pharynx, the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, and the large intestine. So that makes up the alimentary canal. So we had the mouth, and in our throat area is the pharynx. The tube that goes from the back part of your throat down to your stomach is the esophagus. And then we have the stomach where the food is begun to be digested, and kind of a reservoir as well. And then that will empty into the small intestine, and then eventually we'll have the large intestine at the very end, and then at where it exits the body would be the anus. And the food is moved along the canal by wave-like muscular contraction called peristalsis. So imagine sort of like a wave. You have a tube, and then at one place the tube begins, the muscles contract and pinch and make it smaller, and then this small place that it's smaller moves along the tube, and behind it it relaxes, and so it moves it forward, and then as that's moved on a little ways, then it'll do it again. And so this is the way the food is moved along the digestive canal. Now we have next the accessory organs, we call them. These are the organs that include the teeth, the tongue, the salivary glands. You have some right in front of your ear, back part of your jaw, and then you have some of them that are underneath uh, your jaw, kind of like uh, underneath your tongue, the salivary glands that secrete saliva. And then also we have the liver that produces bile that's emptied into the gallbladder, which will eventually empty into the small intestine. And then in that very first part of the small intestine is where the pancreas is located. And the pancreas and the gallbladder kind of empty through a common opening into the very beginning of the small intestine. Now let's talk about the mouth a little bit more in detail. The mouth, through the mouth you take in food, and it's mixed with saliva that has been produced by the salivary glands. Like I said, there is one in the back part of your jaw, like in front of your ears, and then some of them underneath your tongue. They produce the saliva, and the saliva moistens the food, makes it easier to swallow eventually, lubricates the food so it can be swallowed. In the saliva is an enzyme called amylase, and this enzyme actually begins the digestion where it breaks down starch. So if you're eating like bread or pasta or things like that, as you chew it in your mouth and make it very fine and smooth, the saliva has enzymes within it that already begin to break down the starch into sugar. During the chewing process, and the process of chewing is called mastication, and during this chewing of food, you keep your lips closed so that the food stays in your mouth cavity, and the tongue is used to push the food around toward the teeth so that the teeth can break it into smaller pieces and help mix the saliva with the food. So your tongue also plays a role in the sensation of taste. There is the taste sense of sweetness, of salty, sour, and bitter that you experience as the food is being chewed, and that originates in your taste buds. These are located on little small bump-like structures called papillae that are on the surface of your tongue. So you have all these little bumps, these little papillae, and the taste buds are located on the edges of these papillae, not the very top of them, but on the edges of them. And then they have special taste pores where the chemicals that are in the food will cause certain sensory nerves to be stimulated by their presence. Now, many scientists also have recognized there's actually a fifth taste. Umami. It's kind of a meaty taste associated when you eat things that have protein in them. But much of what you define as taste is actually detected by the odors that are in your food. And this becomes pretty obvious that whenever you have a cold or your sinuses are plugged up, you don't taste as well because the majority of our taste comes from the senses that are actually up in our nose. The teeth, there's 4 different types of teeth that are involved in chewing. And when you are very young, you begin getting your teeth. These teeth are called deciduous teeth for the same reason that we called trees that we often have growing in our area that lose their leaves and fall. We call those deciduous. These are the teeth that you will lose before you are an adult. And you can see in the list there that you have some incisors, then you have some cuspids, and then you have 2 molars on either side of your jaw, and another pair of those on either side of your upper jaw as well. So altogether you have about 20 teeth when you have your full set of deciduous teeth. Then once you get a little bit older, then you will start to lose some of these teeth. And when you lose some of these teeth, they're being replaced with teeth that will be your permanent teeth. So in that first set that you had, you didn't have premolars, and you only had 8 molars. As an adult, you're going to have more teeth because your jaw is much bigger. Okay, so these are being replaced. We won't go through the detail of how the teeth are produced, but your permanent teeth, as they begin to grow, actually dissolve away the root of your deciduous teeth, and that's the reason why they're easy to come out or pull out, as we sometimes say. We pull their teeth. But as an adult, you're going to have 32 teeth. So your deciduous teeth only had 20, but as an adult, you have 32 teeth. So one thing I forgot to tell you is that in the back part of your mouth, as when you get to be like your early teens, then you start getting your wisdom teeth, and these are the last molars. Some people, they don't completely emerge out of the gum. Some do, and quite often if they come out, they kind of come out sometimes crooked, and these are often the ones that if you need to have braces, they'll often remove these to make more room for your teeth. Now in the tooth is embedded into your jaw, and then you have the gums, and your gums are called the gingivae, and they cover the bone, and your teeth are connected with connective tissue that attaches each tooth into its socket. And so there is a little bit of flex in those. Some of you maybe have noticed that they kind of seem to move a little bit because it's maybe harder to floss your teeth some days than others, because they do kind of move around a little bit. Not a great amount, but just enough. The part of your tooth that sticks up out of your gum, your gingivae, is called the crown, and the part that you don't see that goes down into your jaw and anchors your tooth in a socket is called the root. So you have the crown, a neck part that's right at the gum level, and then you have the root that anchors that tooth into the jaw. The dentin is the part of the tooth. As you can see, it's in the diagram here, dentin is this, in the diagram is kind of this orangey brown color. That's inside your tooth. You don't see that part. If you were to see that part, it'd often mean maybe you had a cavity that had eaten through the enamel. Um, but the dentin is kind of like similar to bone, and it's what actually makes up most of your tooth. In the crown, the dentin is covered by enamel, and it turns out to be the hardest material in your body. It's very, very tough. You can chew a lifetime with those if you take good care of your teeth. So the enamel protects just the tooth from physical damage and from chemical corrosion. Sometimes that kind of needs a little bit of help or not sometimes, it needs help by brushing your teeth and rinsing and with fluoride rinses and stuff like that. Now, inside of the tooth is what we call the pulp cavity, and you can see that right here, and it has the reds and blues, and you can kind of guess what that probably is. Those are blood vessels. And then there's also lymph vessels inside there. There's nerves and connective tissue that all together make up what we call the pulp cavity, or the pulp. If you have a cavity that eats down in through the enamel into the dentin and it starts becoming painful, it's because it's gotten to the place where the nerves are at. Now, the esophagus is about 10 inches long, so it goes from your throat down to your stomach. It goes down in between your lungs and kind of like behind your heart. And as the food is chewed and softened and lubricated, it becomes like in the shape of a ball, and we call that ball the bolus. And then it's swallowed. In order to swallow it, do you remember the uvula that we've talked about earlier? That little thing that hangs down the back? That soft part of the soft palate is going to move back and up, closing the back of your nose and preventing food from going up into your nose. And then also, at the same time when you're wanting to swallow, the epiglottis is going to cover up the glottis of the larynx so that we don't have food going down into our lungs and getting into the trachea that leads to the lungs. And the esophagus is just a muscular tube, and it's lubricated by many mucus glands, and then that peristalsis that we said, that how food moves along the digestive system, it starts out in your throat and moves it. Sometimes if you've swallowed something a little bit bigger, you can actually feel it going down your esophagus. But it pinches behind the bolus, and then that wave of pinched area continues on down, and behind it the esophagus relaxes again. Now, the stomach is a J-shaped muscular pouch that looks similar to this, like in most adults, and the pouch is closed off from the esophagus by what's called the cardiac sphincter. In this diagram, they call it the esophageal sphincter. They're just different names for the same thing. Cardiac means that it's the end of your stomach that's closer to your heart, but it pinches off, and that's what keeps food from pushing while it's being digested from pushing back up in the esophagus. If some of that does get up in your esophagus, then you can have things like heartburn. At the other end of the stomach, there is another muscle that pinches off the end of the stomach to prevent food from prematurely entering the small intestine, and it's called the pyloric sphincter. And the walls of the muscular heart, the walls of the muscular stomach kind of churn and mix the food with gastric acids that are secreted by the lining of the stomach, and it would digest the whole stomach if it wasn't for the fact that there's a slimy mucus that's been secreted by special cells in the walls of the stomach that keep the gastric juices away from the actual walls of the stomach. So it's for protection. Now sometimes that protection can break down and then you can have things like stomach ulcers and things like that. Now inside the gastric juices is hydrochloric acid. It's a pretty potent acid, and it aids in the digestion, and it also kills any bacteria that may have been swallowed and gets into your stomach. So that's one of our lines of defense. Now the hydrochloric acid that's in the stomach also contains, the stomach also produces something called pepsin in the gastric juices, and the pepsin is responsible for helping your stomach to digest protein, like when you eat meat or nuts or things like that. Now, although the stomach lining doesn't absorb many molecules, it does absorb alcohol and water and certain drugs. So it doesn't have to wait to get all the way into the small intestine before it is absorbed. So those three things, alcohol, water, and certain drugs, can be absorbed directly from the stomach before it ever gets into the small intestine. Now, after the food is thoroughly broken down into a semi-liquid form inside of the stomach, and this semi-liquid form is called chyme, kind of pronounce the CH with a K sound. It's been totally broken down as far as it can in the stomach, and then the stomach will empty it into the small intestine through that pyloric sphincter, and the stomach will contract. You have these peristaltic contractions also in the stomach. It'll contract and push the food into the small intestine, kind of like in small little spurts. And this pyloric valve usually remains closed until the food has been broken down far enough. In other words, it won't allow chunks to enter into the small intestine. So we're going to stop right there, and then tomorrow we'll pick up with the rest of our digestive system.